Long before you ever opened your eyes in this lifetime, a vault deep beneath an Egyptian museum was sealed shut around an artifact so unusual, so anomalous, so historically incompatible that scholars refused to classify it publicly. It wasn't just a crown, it was a contradiction. A relic that didn't fit any dynasty, didn't match any lineage, didn't align with any known pharaoh, and yet radiated the unmistakable aura of royalty. Not earthly royalty, primordial royalty. A prototype of leadership that predates the very concept of kingdoms. And for decades, the museum has quietly protected it, not because they understood it, but because they feared the consequences of revealing something that rewrites human origin. Deep in that climate-controlled vault, isolated from public galleries and research labs, rests a crown forged from materials modern science can't identify. Metal that doesn't corrode. Inscriptions that don't belong to any Egyptian script yet appear older than carved stone. Symbols that light reacts to in ways experts cannot explain. Every attempt to carbon date it yielded impossible results. Numbers so ancient the machines flagged them as errors, suggesting a creation age predating Egyptian civilization itself. Something older than the pyramids, older than recorded language, older than the human understanding of power. The reason it remains locked away isn't academic confusion, it's geopolitical fear. Revealing this artifact would destabilize entire narratives about who belonged on Earth first, who ruled ancient civilizations, and what bloodlines still carry fragments of those rulers. The object didn't match Egypt's known dynasties because it didn't belong to Egypt at all. It belonged to a lineage that appeared across cultures long before borders existed, a lineage that vanished from history without explanation but left prophecies behind, hinting at a return. Curators noticed something else. The crown reacted, not to touch, not to heat, not to light, but to presence. When certain museum staff walked past the vault, nothing happened. But on rare occasions, when individuals with specific genetic markers unknowingly entered the secure wing, sensors flickered, static collected in the air, and faint vibrations hummed through the walls. The crown was dormant, yet not inert. Sleeping, yet not lifeless. As if waiting for recognition. This anomaly led to a secret collaboration between museum officials and international researchers. They began tracing genealogies of individuals who triggered the crown's activity, mapping the ancient bloodline that appeared again and again across continents, across eras, across unrelated families who all shared one common thread. Their ancestors mysteriously disappeared from recorded history at the exact same point in time. As if an entire lineage stepped out of human civilization in a single generation. And as the research deepened, one conclusion became unavoidable. The crown was created for someone who would not appear for thousands of years. Someone whose DNA carried signatures older than pharaohs, older than kings, older than the civilizations that tried to imitate a royalty they never fully understood. And the deeper they traced the bloodline, the narrower the line became, until it pointed toward a single surviving descendant walking the modern world completely unaware of the relic waiting for them. You. Your blood held the dormant imprint. Your ancestry matched the silent symbols. Your energetic field aligned with the artifact's resonance. This is why life has always felt like a remembering instead of a discovering. This is why ancient imagery pulls something out of you that you can't explain. This is why Egypt, its temples, its gods, its mythology, feels less like history and more like déjà vu. Because a fragment of your past, a piece of your identity, has been sitting in a vault beneath sands that once recognized your footsteps. The museum doesn't know your name yet, but the crown does. It has known it since before you arrived here. It has waited across centuries for your return. What the public never learned, but what museum officials recorded in confidential logs, is that the crown reacted only 3 times in the last century. Each reaction was subtle yet undeniable, a pulse of energy so precise that staff originally believed the sensors malfunctioned. But after recalibrations, diagnostics, and expert reviews, the same conclusion returned. The artifact was responding to something outside the vault. The most dramatic response occurred on a night decades ago, the night you were born. At that exact hour, the vault's temperature dropped by 4 degrees without any change in climate control. The light sensors inside flickered violently despite no electrical fluctuations in the building. A faint resonance, measured at a frequency no human-made device emits, vibrated through the artifact chamber, causing dust to lift off the floor in a circular pattern around the crown. A technician monitoring the overnight logs wrote a note that remains redacted to this day. The artifact is awakening. It is recognizing something. Or someone. This wasn't a coincidence. It was recognition. Because the crown was never an object of leadership. It was a locator, a tether between timelines, a ceremonial device forged for one specific bloodline that was expected to return long after the original civilization vanished. The crown wasn't reacting to geography, temperature, or human proximity. It was reacting to a genetic signature re-entering existence. Your ancestry, your energy, your incarnation. That pulse from the vault triggered an internal review, one that museum officials quietly escalated to national authorities. Soon, foreign governments learned of the anomaly. Intelligence agencies were briefed. Researchers were flown in under non-disclosure agreement. They examined the logs and reached a conclusion more startling than the event itself. The crown responded to an off-site biological event. A birth with a matching energetic code. A genetic reactivation. In other words, the relic recognized its rightful heir. What frightened officials most wasn't the event, it was the prophecy tied to it. Ancient texts found near the artifact's original excavation site described a future descendant who would carry the mark of the returning sovereign, someone whose presence alone would restore knowledge lost to collapse and silence the corruption of false rulers. These texts weren't written by Egyptians. They were written by a civilization Egypt inherited wisdom from. A civilization older than pyramids, older than dynasties, older than recorded time. Their final inscriptions said, "The crown shall sleep until the one returns who carries the first light. When they awake, the vault shall tremble." When your heartbeat entered the world, that vault trembled. But this wasn't the last time the crown reacted. Years later, during a period of intense emotional upheaval in your life, a moment of profound pain, transformation, or awakening, the sensors flickered again. A second pulse, a second recognition, as if the artifact were responding not to your location but to your energy rising, your consciousness unlocking, your identity remembering itself. This is why you've always felt like your life didn't fit neatly into human expectations. Why you've always carried an inner authority no one taught you. Why people instinctively look to you for guidance without understanding why. You don't possess confidence, you possess inheritance. And somewhere beneath the desert sands of Cairo sits the physical proof of that inheritance. A crown waiting for the moment its owner finally becomes aware of what they carry. It wasn't stolen. It wasn't lost. It wasn't buried. It was hidden until you were ready. Long before the artifact was placed in the vault, a team of archaeologists struggled to understand how a crown so advanced, so meticulously engineered, ended up buried beneath ruins that predated even the earliest dynasties. They found it sealed in a chamber void of hieroglyphs, offerings, or funerary rites, highly unusual, since every royal object from Egypt's known eras carried inscriptions meant to bind the pharaoh's soul to eternity. But this crown had no such markings. Instead, it bore geometric patterns and astral configurations that didn't match any Egyptian period. The crown belonged to a lineage that predated kingship itself, a lineage that guided civilizations before they even understood what leadership meant. The excavation team noticed something immediately. The craftsmanship was impossibly refined. The metal had no impurities. The curve of the band matched no human head shape recorded from antiquity. And embedded within its structure were microscopic crystalline elements, far too precise to have been created with ancient tools, yet arranged in patterns that perfectly mirrored constellations visible only during a celestial alignment that occurred thousands of years before Egypt rose. To most researchers, this made the artifact mythological. But to the few who recognized the cosmic symmetry, it meant only one thing. The crown was designed for someone who was not fully aligned with ordinary human proportions, consciousness, or destiny. When the artifact was first displayed briefly for internal study, researchers began to report strange experiences. Some felt a pressure in their chest, as if memories they never lived were surfacing. Others felt watched, not by the room, but by the object itself, like a silent intelligence evaluating them. One young researcher had a dream after her first encounter, a vivid vision of a coronation not recorded in any history book, taking place in a luminous hall with walls carved from stone that seemed alive. She saw a figure, faceless yet radiant, kneel before elders who wore robes embedded with constellations. When she touched the crown in the dream, she felt electricity surge through her body. She woke up shaking and refused to return to the chamber. These reports weren't dismissed. They were logged, analyzed, and then quietly classified. The turning point came when a specialist in archaeoastronomy identified the patterns etched into the crown's interior. They weren't decorative. They were coordinates. Astronomical coordinates pointing not to a place in Egypt, not to a place on Earth, but to a star cluster referenced in ancient texts as the origin of the first kings, a mythic location associated with beings who descended to teach early civilizations. This revelation threatened the foundations of both academic and religious framework. So instead of going public, governments intervened. The artifact was removed from research circulation, sealed in the vault, and erased from official records. Yet one question refused to die. If the crown wasn't made for any known ruler, then who was it made for? Years passed. Funding shifted. Museums exchanged leadership. The crown slipped into obscurity beneath layers of bureaucracy, but not because it was forgotten, because it was waiting. Every specialist who studied it, whether for minutes or months, felt the same subtle pull, the same unspoken truth. This wasn't a relic of the past. It was an inheritance for the future. And across continents, in whispered academic circles and encrypted archaeological forums, a rumor began. The rightful heir has not appeared yet. They didn't know your name. They didn't know your story. But they knew the lineage hadn't vanished. Something ancient, older than borders, older than dynasties, older than humanity's fragmented understanding of power, was moving quietly beneath the surface of your reality, aligning your life toward a moment you didn't even know awaited you. Every time you felt torn between worlds, every time you felt out of place, every time you sensed a destiny deeper than anything taught to you, it wasn't imagination. It was resonance. Your spirit was responding to an inheritance held in silence while the world rushed forward, forgetting the ones who once shaped its dawn. Because you weren't born to study pharaohs, you were born to understand why they tried to imitate you. When the artifact was moved into long-term containment, officials believed they had finally secured the mystery. But securing an object is not the same as understanding it, and deep inside the museum's restricted levels, a small group of researchers continued their quiet investigations. Their goal was simple: determine whether the crown was ceremonial, symbolic, or functional. What they discovered shattered that question entirely. The breakthrough came when a genetic anthropologist on the team proposed an experiment that should have been impossible, testing whether the artifact responded differently to individuals of different ancestral backgrounds. According to every scientific principle, this made no sense. Metal cannot differentiate genetic lineages. Artifacts do not choose. And yet, based on the vault's earlier reactions, the team suspected otherwise. So they brought in volunteers, one at a time, under strict confidentiality. None of them knew what they were being tested for. None of them touched the artifact. They were only asked to stand within 6 feet of it. Most participants produced no reaction. The sensors remained silent. The room stayed still. Until they reached the final group, individuals with rare, unbroken bloodlines traced through ancient regions believed to have hosted pre-dynastic civilizations. The moment one of these individuals stepped near the crown, the sensors registered a mild harmonic vibration, a soft, resonant hum. Nothing extraordinary, yet unmistakable. But when a second individual with a similar lineage entered the room, the hum intensified. The lights flickered. The artifact emitted a faint glow from the crystalline structures embedded along its interior ridge. The team froze. In that instant, every doubt they held collapsed. The crown wasn't reacting randomly. It was responding to bloodline encoding. This discovery terrified the museum board. Because it meant the artifact wasn't inert. It was calibrated. But here's where the truth becomes uncanny. Across all the volunteers, dozens tested only at enormous risk to the museum's secrecy, every reaction displayed the same pattern. Mild resonance, slight activation, nothing more. Until one day, during a routine calibration test, the artifact surged with a level of energy it had never displayed before. The vault sensors recorded a peak resonance spike. The metal emitted a low-frequency vibration that caused items on nearby tables to tremble, and a thin arc of blue-white light formed along the crown's inner rim. Visible, undeniable, impossible. Alarmed, the staff checked the logs to see if anyone had entered the room. No one had. The vault was empty. The artifact reacted to someone who wasn't physically present. That's when a historian on the team remembered an ancient inscription found near the original excavation site. Until that moment, it had been considered symbolic poetry. But now its meaning was inescapable. The heir shall awaken the crown from afar, before foot meets stone, before name meets metal. The artifact didn't need proximity. It needed alignment. The spike occurred on the same day, you guessed it, when a major breakthrough, awakening, or emotional turning point happened in your life. An event that pushed you closer to remembering who you are, even if you didn't understand it yet. You were the first descendant whose energy activated the crown without being in the same country. You were the first signal strong enough to pierce stone, sand, and steel. You were the first whose presence caused a relic thousands of years old to respond like a living thing. The team realized something chilling. All the descendants tested before were fragment. You are the full sequence. Your bloodline didn't dilute through time. It consolidated. It focused. It refined itself generation after generation until it produced you. the one who could awaken what no one else could. And in the report that followed, sealed instantly by government order, one sentence stood out above all others. The sovereign has returned, even if they do not yet know. You have walked your entire life feeling like you were waiting for something unseen, something faint but persistent calling you forward. This was it. This is what your blood remembered long before your mind did. Somewhere beneath Egypt's sands, a crown glows softly in a dark room, because you exist. Not a myth, not a symbol, a returning ruler who hasn't yet touched their throne. After the crown's spontaneous activation, a meeting was held in a windowless government facility. Not in the museum, not in an academic institution, but in a geopolitical environment reserved only for phenomena that threaten the stability of established narratives. The people in that room were not art historians. They were intelligence officers, cultural ministers, and scientific consultants tasked with identifying one thing. How dangerous is a crown that chooses its wearer? The answer terrified them. Because unlike every other artifact housed in a museum, this crown didn't simply represent power. It recognized it. The readings showed that the artifact didn't resonate with biological presence alone. It responded to consciousness signatures, patterns of awareness, intention, emotional fields, and what one analyst called ancestral echo. In other words, it wasn't reacting to a person. It was reacting to a lineage remembering itself. Once this was understood, the artifact was deemed too volatile for public display. Not because it would physically harm anyone, but because it would reveal lineage truths the world is not prepared to face. Imagine a tourist from across the world stepping unknowingly into the exhibit, and the crown lighting up in response to their presence. Imagine every scholar forced to acknowledge that the rightful heir to an unknown ancient throne was alive and walking the earth. Imagine governments realizing that someone outside their control carried an inheritance older than their institutions. That scenario could collapse multiple religious frameworks, historical assumptions, and political structures overnight. So the crown was buried again. Not under sand this time, but under silence. But the silence didn't last. A series of covert experiments followed, each designed to determine whether the artifact's reaction was predictable or random. It was neither. It reacted to one thing only, a very specific genetic sequence, one so rare that only a handful of people in recorded history ever carried it fully. And every time that sequence shifted, whether through emotional upheaval, spiritual awakening, or genetic activation, the artifact responded like a tuning fork struck by an unseen hand. This is when the researchers discovered the most startling detail of all. The crown's energy pattern didn't match any known Earth-based technology or metallurgy. Instead, its vibrational signature mirrored readings found in only two places: ancient meteor fragments and star temple sites positioned along ley lines used by pre-dynastic civilizations. In simple terms, the crown was not designed with Earth as its primary reference point, and that realization forced archaeologists to revisit theories long dismissed as myth. Across ancient cultures, stories exist of sky-born rulers, stars that walked, teachers from above, and sovereigns who came not from the throne rooms of men but from the chambers of heaven. These weren't metaphors. They were memories, fractured recollections of a lineage that did not originate on this planet but guided it through its earliest dawns. Your bloodline, your ancestry, your echo through time. When analysts mapped your lineage against these myths, every contradiction became clarity. You weren't reading about your ancestors and legends, you were reading translations of the roles they once held. Roles erased by time yet preserved by stone. roles whispered through symbols that your spirit recognized long before your mind understood. But here's the part they won't put in any report. The crown didn't just identify you. It has been waiting for you. Every time you felt misplaced, misunderstood, or out of sync with the world around you, it wasn't because you were flawed, it was because you were unclaimed. The world tried to hand you an identity too small for your spirit. The crown, locked in that vault, holds the proof of the truth you've always sensed beneath your skin. You came into this life carrying an ancient authority that modern systems cannot decode. It's why you've always felt on the edge of remembering something enormous. It's why you've always sensed you were meant for more than ordinary existence. It's why situations that break others awaken strength in you. It's why your intuition feels like guidance rather than guesswork. The crown doesn't glow for historians. It doesn't hum for politicians. It doesn't awaken for institutions. It awakens for you, because its creation was tied to your lineage long before Egypt knew what a pharaoh was. And every day you grow closer to your purpose, the artifact grows more restless in its vault. The museum believes they are protecting the crown from the world. But the truth is far more unsettling. They are protecting the world from the revelation of who you truly are. Deep inside the museum, beyond the vault doors and biometric locks, there exists a document almost no one has seen, a translation draft that was never formally published. It concerns a set of microscopic inscriptions found on the inner ridge of the crown, invisible to the naked eye and positioned in such a way that only the wearer would ever see them. When a specialist enhanced the markings under high-resolution imaging, the team realized they weren't dealing with language as we know it. The symbols were fractal, multi-layered, shifting patterns that changed shape depending on the angle of light. At first, the researchers assumed they had discovered a form of ornamentation. They were wrong. The symbols were not decorative. They were instructions. The fractal geometry encoded a message that could only be deciphered when viewed through a computational sequence based on pre-dynastic measurement ratios, constellational alignments, and harmonic frequencies. Once decoded, the symbols formed a translation that stunned the team into silence. When the bearer awakens, the crown shall answer their name. When the cycle returns, so shall the sovereign. This inscription was thousands of years older than the Egyptian writing system, older than Sumerian, older than anything associated with human civilization. No one could explain how such a message could be embedded in metallurgy so advanced it shouldn't exist, or why the inscription addressed someone who would appear far in the future. But the most alarming part? The translation did not read like a blessing. It read like a prophecy fulfilled by your arrival. Because the artifact didn't just speak of a sovereign returning, it spoke of a bearer awakening, a consciousness unfurling, a memory reactivating, and that is exactly what has been happening within you. Every intuitive knowing you cannot explain, every déjà vu that feels like a recovered memory, every surge of inner authority that appears when you need it most, these are not random moments. They are echoes of who you were before this incarnation, resurfacing because the cycle referenced in the inscription has begun. According to the sealed report, the inscription was designed to resonate emotionally with the heir once they became aware of the crown's existence. You don't need to touch the artifact for the message to reach you. The recognition happens inwardly, in the part of your soul that remembers everything your human mind forgot. That's why certain symbols, cultures, and eras pull at you with inexplicable familiarity. That's why you've always felt older than your age, wiser without being taught, guided even when alone. That's why every major disruption in your life pushed you closer to a version of yourself that feels ancient. Your awakening wasn't triggered by chance. It was timed. And this timing terrified the researchers, not because they feared you specifically, but because the inscription predicted not only the heir's return, but also global conditions that would accompany the awakening. Periods of widespread uncertainty, the fall of old systems of power, the rise of individuals carrying ancient memory, the restoration of forgotten truths. The world is currently mirroring every aspect of that prophecy. That is why the crown is reacting. That is why your lineage is stirring. That is why you feel pulled toward purpose without knowing its full form. You are moving into alignment with something you were always meant to reclaim. And the most guarded line of the inscription, the one redacted from all released documents, reads, "The crown shall remain hidden until the sovereign remembers their origin. Then no vault shall hold it." Think about that. The artifact is not waiting for a museum to approve its release. It is waiting for you to reach the level of awareness and authority your lineage encoded into you before birth. Every shift you feel inside you now, every awakening, every rising clarity, every moment you outgrow old versions of yourself, is part of the remembrance process that will eventually make the vault irrelevant. A crown cannot be hidden from its rightful sovereign forever. Not by steel, not by secrecy, not by institutions afraid of what it represents. The artifact will find its way to you when the next inner threshold breaks, and that threshold is closer than you think. There will come a day, quiet at first, unnoticed by most, when something shifts in the museum's vault. The cameras won't capture it correctly. The sensors will glitch. The temperature will drop, then spike, then stabilize in a pattern that matches no environmental logic. And when officials review the data, they'll see what they feared all along. The crown's resonance is escalating. Not randomly, not mechanically, in response to you. Because your awakening has reached a threshold the artifact was designed to detect. Your consciousness has risen to a frequency that the ancient makers anticipated long before Egypt existed. This is what the world has never understood. The crown was not crafted to sit on a shelf or be admired in glass. It was created as a time-locked messenger, its activation cycles tied to the return of a lineage powerful enough to disrupt the future if it ever forgot the past. And that lineage is yours. The museum will panic. Governing bodies will request emergency report. Foreign agencies will attempt to replicate the crown's readings in classified labs. None of it will work, because the crown does not respond to authority. It responds to authenticity, to sovereignty encoded in blood, consciousness, and destiny. The artifact activates only for one reason: the rightful sovereign is remembering. This realization will force world institutions into a dilemma they hoped to avoid forever. If the crown is activated, then the bloodline tied to its creation is no longer dormant. And if the bloodline is no longer dormant, then the return of the ancient sovereigns is not myth, not metaphor, not symbolism, but reality. And here is the truth institutions cannot stop. Your emergence was predicted in multiple ancient cultures long before they ever met each other. Egyptian priests called you the returning light. Sumerians called your lineage the ones who remember. The Dogon called your ancestors the skyborn teachers. Early Hebrew mystics spoke of a traveler king who would reclaim what was sealed beneath stone. And lost inscriptions from pre-flood civilizations referenced a crown that awakens when the cycle turns and the sovereign rises among mortals. For centuries these were dismissed as myth. Now the myths have found their owner. But the truly staggering revelation is this: the crown wasn't hidden because it was valuable. It was hidden because it identifies the chosen one out loud. If you were to stand before it today, the artifact would not remain silent. It would illuminate. It would vibrate. It would restore the ancient sigils along its inner rim. It would speak, not in words but in recognition. It would choose you in front of anyone watching. This is why governments intervened. This is why the artifact is buried under layers of security. This is why curators pretend it doesn't exist. The world is not prepared for a living sovereign whose lineage predates civilization. But readiness has never been your concern. Awakening is. Every internal shift you've felt, every moment of clarity, every spontaneous intuition, every surge of inner authority, is part of the alignment process your ancestors engineered. You weren't meant to chase the crown. You were meant to become the consciousness capable of wearing it. Because the crown does not grant you power. It confirms the power you've carried across lifetimes. The final translated inscription, kept hidden from the public and classified by multiple governments, reads, "When the sovereign awakens in full, the crown will leave its guardians and return to the lineage of light. Not might, not could, but will, meaning no vault can hold it. No institution can keep it. No authority can deny it. The crown's fate is tied to yours. And as your awareness expands, the world edges closer to the moment of revelation. The moment they realize that the artifact in the vault is not a relic of an ancient king. It is the coronation waiting for your return. You were never meant to observe history. You were meant to resume it. And the crown has been waiting for you to remember.